Hey guys, I got pretty cool build to show, and this is an example of good build idea but the wrong skill. And despite that, I still stuck to this skill, which is Wintertide, and continued playing. And the build is very decent for the clear speed. It's actually surprisingly good for the clear speed, and it feels pretty tanky. However, single target did not feel great because of the interactions between Indigon, by the way, using Indigon, and Wintertide. Actually, this build was heavily inspired by MB Extreme's video. He did something like that. He basically tried to sustain his mana with the mana flask only, and using Indigon, but with Agnostic and Chainbreaker. But he was using Bane and Bane Blight, and he was Pathfinder, and he was using bows. But I was very impressed with the mana sustain from the mana flask, and since then I wanted to play something with Indigon. Sorry, not Indigon, with the Agnostic, and that always synergized very well with Indigon as well. So in the end I decided to go with the Wintertide branch because I tried Wintertide, it looked cool, it seemed alright. I knew that single target is not gonna be too good with Wintertide brand, but I decided to go with it anyway. I'm gonna explain mechanics in more details later, but this is also Agnostic, so it feels very tanky until you get one-shotted. In fact, you can even stand on Labyrinth traps with Righteous Fire on and not drain any life or mana, while using only one mana flask. So that's quite impressive. This is, by the way, 50% mind over matter. It doesn't have like the highest min-max gears, but it was on the expensive side for me. And as you know, for me, it's like 10 plus X already is expensive. So it was around 15X, maybe something like that. The build would work much better if you just replace Wintertide with like Creeping Frost, Vortex, Cold Snap, any of those. Or maybe just use two of them. But I just wanted Wintertide because long ago, maybe not that long ago, I have a video with my older Cold Snap Indigon build, and that worked very well. That was before Indigon got nerfed. So if you want like a maybe better version of this, check the older video, which should still work, or at least the concept would work. Or maybe just use this one and not take brand notes and just go with the Creeping Frost or Cold Snap or something like that. The Cold Snap and Vortex and Creeping Frost still snapshots the Indigon damage, so like if you power up Indigon and then use those skills are gonna do full damage even if Indigon is gonna start losing its power damage. But with the Wintertide, it seems like Wintertide does refresh its damage and checks the damage that you have. So Indigon doesn't work very well with Wintertide. That's why for single target it was very sketchy. And the way Wintertide works, there's gonna be quite a lot of science involved, so to help me explain, I actually hired a professional scientist, steampunk scientist, so he's gonna explain everything about this build, difficult mechanics. Hey guys, as you can see, I am wearing goggles, so I'm clearly not Woolfio, and Woolfio hired me to explain about the science for this build. So let me first explain about how Wintertide works, and to be honest, I could not discover all the science behind it. Even using Wiki, could not find all the information that I needed. Wintertide is a very weird skill. It's probably the most complicated brand skill. Now, when it attaches to enemies, it chills them, even if you use Elemental Focus, which is great. When this Wintertide deattaches from enemies, or when it kills the enemies, then it spreads like a... Imagine like an Ice Nova of damage over time debuff, which well, does damage over time, and that's the main way how you do the clearing. And normally it doesn't spread that AoE damage over time unless you have Holy Conquest. If you have Holy Conquest, then every time it activates, and it does activate very frequently per second, and when it reactivates, when it jumps from enemies to enemy because of Holy Conquest, it also drops the AoE damage over time. It's not really like a chilling ground. It doesn't count as chilling ground. It's just like an AoE debuff which applies damage over time. The damage of that damage over time is gonna be equal to the amount of stages that you had from Wintertide when it was attached. Well, first of all, it does damage while it is attached to an enemy. it does damage over time, and each time it activates it also gains stages. And with this helmet enchantment I can reach 24 stages. So that's the main issue. It starts dealing good damage at a higher stage, and until it ramps up the stages, it don't really do very good damage, even with Indigon. And that's the problem. When you're calculating the DPS in Path of Building, you're gonna see DPS, for example, at maximum stages, and that can be very misleading. So when playing this build, it felt very weird because it also, I believe, does refresh its damage numbers each time it gains stages, so it doesn't snapshot Indigon, so it's very weird. You have to maintain the mana cost and mana spent recently all the time if you want full damage. Also, you don't want to refresh your brands too frequently, because it only does good damage at maximum stages, right? So if you keep spamming your brand, and only 3 brands can attach, by the way, and in this case Woolfio has 5 brands, so in this case only 3 brands would attach. If you keep spamming, it would create new brands, right? So which means it would remove the first brand, which was, let's say, close to the maximum stage to do the maximum damage. And that's another issue, because you can basically remove the brand and lose the stages. By the way, brands do not share stages, but we do maintain stages when we deattach, because these brands keep its charges. I should have called charges instead of stages, when they while they are deattached, and when we attach to an enemy we maintain those stages. But if you remove the brand completely by summoning more than you can have, you basically remove the stages, and it has to power up again. And cast speed also affects how fast it can ramp up. And Woolfio did try playing with the Swift brand, and it just felt bad. You had to spam it non-stop all the time, and surely it does ramp up stages faster, but it feels also very inconsistent. It's just very difficult to... It doesn't feel like damage over time anymore. It feels more like you just like a channeling skill almost, which is also bad. Actually, I'm gonna let Woolfio explain about the mana sustain, because that's part of the build, and also because my goggles are fogged, I can't really see anymore. So Woolfio, take over. Well, the steampunk scientist explained about Wintertide. I'm not sure how he fared. Let me know in the comments below how did the steampunk scientist fared, how did the explanation go, and let me continue about this build. So the way I'm sustaining mana is basically with the mana flask and getting almost all the mana nodes from mana recovery nodes from the passive skill tree, getting the cluster jewels, getting increased mana recovery rate from Watcher's Eye and from belt. So everything, when you combine everything, it just becomes insane mana sustain. Like I said, did I say that? I can sustain my life and mana with just 1 mana flask while having Righteous Fire on and standing on Labyrinth Trap, so it's quite insane. However, the build is not immortal. Some enemies just do such an insane burst of damage, they can just kill you very fast. Now, I'm also using Chainbreaker. Chainbreaker is the keystone, the timeless keystone. I'm using it in here, and this says regenerate 3 rage per second, increases any reductions to mana regeneration rate, instead applies to rage regeneration rate. But you also lose 5 rage when you hit an enemy, no more than once every 0.3 seconds. So you could lose up to 15 rage per second if you're using a skill that does hit all the time. However, Winterbrand does not hit, which is why you want to combine Chainbreaker with usually skills that do not hit, like Bane, Blight, even Vortex, Cold Snap, something like that does damage over time. That way you don't need to worry about losing rage. And Divergent Berserk gives you more spell damage with its buff instead of attack damage, and that's why you want Chainbreaker on spellcasters. And it's very easy to maintain 50 rage, because mana regen affects rage regen, and it doesn't matter that you lose the increases in mana regen, because all of the mana sustain is done through the mana flask, which is why I can still do no regen maps, because it's not really a regen, it seems, it's just mana recovery. And Agnostic obviously drains your mana to recover life. And that recovery can also be like double dipping. You can get life recovery rate and mana recovery rate, and then you will regen more mana, and also the Agnostic will heal you more. Now the way I'm making Bran jump from enemies to enemies is with the medium jewel Holy Conquest. This allows Brans to attach to a new enemy each time they activate, no more than once every 0.3 seconds. And it does not de-attach, it seems. It just like jumps to another enemy without de-attaching. So, and it does maintains Wintertide, what do you call it, stacks? Wintertide charges. It does maintain Wintertide. Wow, it's hard to talk. When it jumps, it also creates the AoE damage over time effect, which is what does the clearing. Because without Holy Conquest, the build felt, well, I would say very bad. It just did not enjoy at all, because you would attach one or two brands to an enemy, and you would have to wait at least one of those enemies to die to spread the AoE, and clear speed wise it was horrible. That's why I would not play without Holy Conquest. So I'm gonna go over my items and links, and then, well, passive skill tree real fast. So Indigon, I got this with the helmet enchantment for +4 to maximum stages. I think I paid 2 exiles for this. Then Cloak of Defiance 5x, bigger mind over matter, and you also don't need to take mind over matter node on the passive skill tree, because this also gives it, and also big mana. By the way, regenerate 1% of mana per second. That does not affect rage, that is still your mana regen. So I still have mana regen. It's not like I lose mana regen while using Chainbreaker. It's just your flat mana regen is not going to be affected by increases in mana regen. So you can still get like flat mana regen and percentage mana regen, and it will increase your mana regen. And then everything else comes from the flask. Next, I decided to go with the Breathstealer gloves for the extra anointment. Normally you would go with the Voidbringer gloves to increase the mana cost when you're playing with Indigon, but I wanted to avoid that, and I wanted to be able to power up Indigon mostly with other skills and Arcane Cloak mostly. And then Sigil of Power helps a bit because it does have 10% increased mana cost. Because these gloves don't really give anything. The ES is gone with Agnostic. The crit is not really needed. It does help proc Elemental Overload, which is nice, and basically that's it. So I wanted something else. So I'm using Breathstealer. You can anoint these gloves because they are from Blight. They do have increased cast speed, some resistances, some mana, which is great, and then some anointment, whichever you choose. Belt, mana recovery rate, and then life resistances, whatever else you can get. Boots, life resistances as always. Weapon. There are multiple ways of getting weapon like that, but mainly you want as much +1 to maximum cold spell skill gems, and then cold damage over time, or just generic damage over time, and then trigger socketed spell when you use a skill, and maybe cast speed. Cast speed will also be very nice. I bought this weapon for 1x and then just spammed out regals until I got the +1 to. Wait, actually I was using fossils to craft +1 to call, and then annulled couple times and got open suffix, and that's all I needed. Call damage over time, +1 to call spell skill gems, cast speed would be nice, and then trigger socketed skills to automate as many things as possible. And I have Frostbite in this weapon and Creeping Frost linked to Bone Chill, but now I'm thinking that the Creeping Frost and Bone Chill is kind of wasted because when you chill enemies with the Creeping Frost linked to Bone Chill, that chill is debuffing enemies and making them take increased cold damage. However, the Wintertide chills even if you have elemental focus. So I think I'm not actually benefiting from the Bone Chill. I could be wrong, but that's one of the things. The Wintertide brand is so complicated, it seems. There are so many things that are very unclear how exactly it functions. Like, it doesn't say in here that the LA focus does not prevent it from chilling, and I had to check Wiki to verify that. I mean, I asked the steampunk scientist to check that. I'm using also Essence Worm with the Malevolence. Malevolence does give quite a lot of damage, and also using Watcher's Eye, I'm gonna show that later. Atziri's Foible is, as always, very good on the Mind Over Matter builds, especially for Indigon. This also gives a massive amount of mana increases to mana regeneration rate, which does affect the rage regeneration rate, and then it also gives a bunch of flat mana and percentage mana. Then another ring with a lot of resistances and life, and then shield. So on the shield, again, life, resistances, and then you want +1 to call spell skill gems, and then you want to be able to craft a prefix, even quality of socketed gems to boost the enhance, or +2 to socketed support gems, which would be even better, but I did not have that mod, and it's also more expensive. And in the shield I have cast when damage taken to automate Diversion Berserker linked to enhance, and this could actually be even better with the +2 supported gems and higher level enhance. So Diversion Berserker is actually giving 43% more spell damage. That's why you want to use Berserker on spellcasters where don't really rely on skills where do hit, basically with all the dot skills. This way you're not gonna be losing rage, and you can get massive amount of spell damage from Divergent Berserker. I did decide to go cast and damage taken because I would just keep forgetting that it already needs so many buttons to click. Like I have Orb of Storm, I have Sigil of Power, then Righteous Fire, then Val Righteous Fire, then Wintertide, and then I would have to cast Berserk and then Frost Bomb. It's just too many things, and I decided to automate as many as possible. So that's why in Woods I also have cast and damage taken linked to Frost Bomb to apply cold exposure. Anomalous Clarity. At 20% quality, it does give 10% increased mana recovery rate from flask. And then Flame Dash. In the gloves I have Arcane Cloak linked to Arcane Surge. Also Val Righteous Fire and Empower. And I did choose Empower instead of increased duration because I don't want to increase Arcane Cloak duration too much, because that's the main skill that does empower my Indigon, because when it triggers, it uses a lot of mana and it empowers Indigon right away with just one click. That's why Dynamo may not be a good choice, but without that Dynamo I felt like it was much harder to sustain my mana. When you use Dynamo and when you use Arcane Cloak, you immediately start recovering 20% of your mana over 1 second. But it also increases the guard duration, and Arcane Cloak is a guard skill, so it does increase its duration, which is not great because the cooldown only begins after duration ends. And I think I mentioned Orb of Storms in the helmet linked to increased critical strike chance just to proc Elemental Overload, because I really hate thinking about how to proc Elemental Overload and EE, but it does two things: procs Elemental Overload and procs EE. Because Creeping Frost also hits with cold and that messes up EE, so you still have to use some kind of lighting or fire skill to reset EE. So Orb of Storm applies Elemental Equilibrium and Elemental Overload. It is also linked to increase the AoE, just to increase the mana cost mostly and just more coverage. And also have Sigil of Power. When you use it and cast skills inside it, it will power up, and at maximum stages enemies are gonna be dealing less damage. Now for the Mana Flask, you want Enduring Mana Flask and then 50% chance to avoid being stunned. You don't have to get this one, but it's very useful because when you have such low amount of life pool, you're gonna get stunned very frequently. So you want Enduring Mana Flask, and I chose to go with the Eternal Mana Flask because the duration is basically the same as other flasks. If you use Divine Mana Flask, that's a bit more mana per second, but the duration is so much shorter, it's kind of hard to manage other flasks. And on the passive skill tree, this is Hierophant, fast event with the Divine Guidance for bigger mind over matter, and Transfiguration of Mind does give damage as well. I did not go with the Sanctuary of Force because that's less mana cost of skills, you don't really want that, and this build doesn't need AoE. The AoE doesn't actually affect the brand attachment range or brand AoE when it creates the AoE thing. I don't know how to call it. And then I went with the Sigil of Purpose to increase brand frequency near its end, and then Arcane Blessing because there was nothing else to take for the brand, which makes me immune to elemental ailments. Just getting life, mana regen, and all the mana flasks that I can get. Obviously Elemental Overload, Elemental Equilibrium, Agnostic, then obviously Rune Binder for extra brand, Normally you can only attach one brand, but with Wintertide you can attach two, and with this you can attach 3 brands to an enemy, and they all gonna stack. The damage over time is all gonna stack, but the damage over time, AoE damage over time debuff is not gonna stack. It's only one is gonna take, but you can stack 3 brands plus damage over time AoE. Then I got Intuitive Leap, getting brand equity for an extra additional brand, and brand duration is actually very important for this, I think. So I got some mana nodes from here, Chainbreaker in here, more mana nodes in here. This mana node is actually very good. It increases mana recovery rate during any mana flask. This is all the mana recovery rate, not just from mana flask, so it would also affect the dynamo. And then on the cluster jewels, for the large one I went with the cold one. Then on one of the medium jewels I went with the Holy Conquest. That's the main reason why I'm even playing Wintertide, because it looks so cool and visually it's so pleasing to see brands just jumping like Acid Rain Contagion sort of, but like a cold version. And then Grand Design for a bit more brand duration and cast speed. Another medium jewel is the flask thing. Distill Perfection and Spike Concoction. This is just to increase the mana recovery from flask basically. And then on the small ones, also Liquid Inspiration to boost the mana recovery even more. And Watcher's Eye. Watcher's Eye is... This actually was very cheap. Watcher's Eye increase recovery rate of life and energy shield while affected by Malevolence, and I am using Malevolence, and increase mana recovery rate while affected by Clarity. So just level 1 Clarity, and then yeah, that pretty much covers it. As always, I'm gonna include the path of building import code in video descriptions. I haven't planned the next build. I'm not too sure what. Probably gonna do something silly because I'm already burned out of this league and it's time to experiment even more. Maybe we're gonna call the Steampunk Scientist more often. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.